we'll wait for Jason to macerate and then we'll start. Have you swallowed?
Oh, yes.
Achari. Hello, and welcome back to Talking About Who. This is part 2 of 3 on season 4. I'm like 3, 2, 1. I could do it. No, I can't. Last time we accorded points to the Smugglers, the 10th Planet, and Power of the Daleks, and they're currently in that reverse order. So our favourite story so far has been Power of the Daleks on 23, 10th Planet on 21.5, and the Smugglers on 20.5. But it is all to play for. I'm Paul, or P-Bal, whatever you want to call me, and I'm joined by...
Hello, I'm still James.
Hello, I'm Jason.
Not still Jason.
Well, I can never ever make my mind up as to whether I'm still Jason or not, but I'll be it for part 2 of 3 in season 4. I love that. That was a great little bit of play there, and I can't do the Ted Rogers thing either, so I'm not even going to try.
We'll just put Jason #Cardiff Gay.
Hashtag. It's the...
Okay, moving on.
Don't give him his own hashtag.
Oh, I've got my own hashtag now. It's happened. It's
He's always using that one.
I use it all the time. I don't mind advertising.
Yeah. Least said, soon as mended. The first story that we've got to look at in part 2 is the Highlanders. Okay, the new. Who's going to start this one? Not take the Highlanders. It's the Highlanders.
Go on, Jason, you can go first on this one.
Okay, well, okay, the new there, it certainly is, because we're in 1746, and we join the aftermath of the Battle of Culloden. This is the last of the true historicals, and an introduction to somebody who would become a very, very long-running companion. And then sadly, again, yet another fully lost story. I think, in my opinion, and I'm going to lay this out here for the start of the story, we've got to a point where I think it was the right direction to start resting the historicals, or to rest the historicals full on. The series clearly had started to move in another direction. Innes Lloyd had a definite approach that he was looking to take with the series. And I think the historicals obviously had a history that came in very early in the program's history, because they weren't out on the outset looking to make a sci-fi series. They were looking to make something that was a bit of a mix between the two. And the historicals suited Bill Hartnell's era. They were never really going to suit Pat Troughton in the way that I think he was going to run the Doctor. So for this to be the last one, I think that's probably the right decision that the program took. And unfortunately, looking back at it, this isn't one of the best.
I wouldn't like to disagree with Jason so early on in the video.
But you're going to.
But I'm going to. There's a point, I think, if you watch the War Games, I think, where you don't know that it's not a historical. Does that make sense? Yeah. And I mean, it's hard to say. It's hard how it would have panned out. And I know Douglas Camfield did pitch a historical, I think, for the following season, I believe. I find it sad that this is kind of the au revoir, because it's interesting, because I think there was a notion of having pure historical or sci-fi, and it's not till sort of later on that they go, actually, we probably do a little bit of both. And I'm going to go out on a limb and wonder whether Time Warrior might be the first time that they mix the two. If anyone can think of another one earlier than that, put it in there and tell me I'm wrong. I'm happy to be told I'm wrong, but I'm not sure I can think of another historical and sci-fi mix up until that point.
I think you're right. I think it's the Time Warrior.
It's quite a way into it. I mean, it is interesting, but I mean, I'm not going to disagree with you in terms of it actually is quite a stodgy tale. I mean, it's difficult actually, because I think there's there are certain periods of history that are more exciting than others. I mean, maybe romantically so, just on how you imagine them to have been. I don't know a huge amount about the Jacobite rebellion. I don't even know what I'm talking about. The Jacobite rebellion. I don't know an awful lot about it. I know a little bit more about it from watching this. It does feel slightly like they're all doing quite a dreary Sunday afternoon drama. And Hannah Gordon, God bless her, beautiful rose. I've got the rose in the garden. Beautiful rose. Love Hannah Gordon. Love her watercolor challenge. But she is honouring this text. She's giving it some very regal definition, shall we say. She's definitely honouring it. But it does feel that it just hits middle ground and stays there. I don't think it accelerates into anything.
It's quite telling that this was the first story to be wiped. They
didn't do it by quality, darling. It wasn't like that. They just by dint of it being the first tape to be reused.
Just happened to be the first one where they were like, what should we tape over? You know, like when you had a VHS and you were like, what should we tape over? Well, don't touch, the royal wedding or anything else like that. What we got? We've got the Highlanders, tape over it. It's just
they kept Genesis of the Daleks, though, didn't they? He said. No, if you read the wiped books, you'll see that it was not the case that they just picked it by merit. Fact fans. It's things I like about it. Let's do things I like. I like Michael Elwyn. I like Algernon. I think that's quite a sweet little character piece. And obviously, he's got a great career. And I like that. And there's some cheeky interplay between him and Polly and Kirsty. I like that. Polly, again, as I sort of mentioned before, she's had the U-turn. So now she's a go-getter. And she's like, stop your crying, woman. Stop this nonsense. I'm a modern woman. And, this is how we roll. They've ramped up the Patrick Troughton dressing up and pretending to be other people thing. That's that they've kept that going. So he drags up for the first time. He does it again, sort of a little bit in the next one. So he gets to do his comedy voices and a dress up, and he's the most violent German doctor you'd ever had. He smacks the guy's head up and down on the desk to get headaches. To get headaches. I mean, it's nice. It's brutal. So I like that. I think I might have slightly run out of things that I like. If anyone can help me, I would be very grateful.
It's really difficult because it's a missing story. When I was reading about it, because I've not watched any sort of reconstruction or listened to the audio, so I'm still going just by what I've read. The story didn't jump off the page at me. It kind of just like, oh, okay, yeah, this happened. Apart from a few notable things, like you're saying, the doctor dressing up and pretending to be the maid and the German doctor, there isn't a great deal to the rest of the story. It's like, they meet up with this clan, they head off, then they get him, they get captured. It's all quite bland in the fact that this is all sort of stuff that there's nothing that elevates it to a more superior storyline, because there's no more to the plot than this. And I think you're right with the historicals. I mean, I am a fan of historicals, and I think that the sort of the newer Who stories have managed to bring back the historicals, really successfully. But at this point, if this was, the one to hold up to say how good historicals are, it would have failed. Unfortunately, there's just not enough to it to make it a thrilling tale. The notable thing, obviously, is Jamie joining the TARDIS crew. But apart from that, for me, I find this story very difficult jump on board with.
And strangely, for a 4-part, the main thrust of this story really appears to be get captured and then escape again, because it just seems to happen quite repetitively throughout. Various characters get captured, various characters escape, and you get a little bit of fancy dress in there, and you get some bits in, but there's not a huge amount of substance in the story. And it was interesting, actually, because Elwyn Jones was engaged to write the story, but in the end, Jerry Davis had to write it. Don't know what the history is behind that, but clearly this was put together in maybe it was put together in a bit of a hurry, whatever. It's just not very rememberable. And it's interesting because obviously Jamie wasn't originally going to be a long-running cast member. So this was something that was decided on the back of audience appreciation that was coming through at the time, that they enjoyed the character. And it's interesting because the soft lilt to his accent is almost gone in the next story, you know, because obviously that was never going to be something that was going to be carried through and into a long-running part. So, yeah, it's interesting that they had to go back, remount the filming, apparently, for this.
I do wonder whether it's just the production team liked Fraser. I don't know. I don't know. You know, when these myths sort of arise that people were writing into the BBC saying we must have him as a regular. Do you know what I mean? I'm not saying that that's not true. Absolutely, that's the story as told. But I always sort of question it. I think, really? They weren't asking.
They showed it to a panel of 2 old ladies, and they just went, "Oh, we like him," and they were right, he's in.
I mean, it's clearly it's clear it's a late edition, whatever it is, because it throws the next few stories quite badly in some respects, because they just don't know what to do with him, or they have not got room for him, or they carve up his lines or carve up somebody else's lines to make it work. So it's clearly that there's some sort of a late decision, and I think that's indicative of Who at the time, because we've already said there were some late changes going on into the back end of the season, or in season 3. And, you know, they're still trying to find that sort of winning formula. They've got a new doctor. At this stage, they've got sort of 2 companions. It's quite a brave decision to bring a 3rd companion on board. I always think 3 is too many in the TARDIS. I've always said that. So it's quite brave to all of a sudden take that decision. And then does that ultimately lead to the decision to drop the Ben and Polly characters further on down the line? Not sure again. So yeah, clearly a late call. I think the right one though, because I do think actually in many respects, the relationship that develops between Pat and Fraser as the years progress is one that is formidable and being barely matched, I think, by a doctor companion. Or it has been matched a number of once or twice, but certainly, you know, that friendship is clear to see on screen.
Yeah, I think the problem is that it does come at I think especially a detriment to the Ben character. I think Michael Grace, he bears the brunt of this. I think he gets a raw deal on that. But it is a different Jamie that stops, isn't it? I don't think the Jamie that's in this story is very identifiable with the one which stays after. It's not just the accent. I think there's a lot of
character changes,
character traits. I think they decided there's a slight sort of Katerina vibe, isn't there? That he can't be quite as historical as he you know, 'cause he just drowned the story to an extent. And absolutely everywhere he went, he's like, "What is this? I don't understand. I'm from 18th century or whatever." So yeah, I mean, I suppose that is the plus that you get Jamie. I think the locations, that again, we're fixated on the locations, but the location bits look quite nice. And I think the atmosphere looks good. I think historicals especially, you get the atmosphere from the look, from the period, from the costumes, from the set design, I think more so than the space ones in the future, because you can imagine the future, whereas you want the atmosphere, you want the look, and I think a lot of the look is what you need. So again, this one is probably a huge casualty of not being able to see it.
I mean, I don't have many stats about this either. I mean, the one that I've got is it's actually filmed down the road from me at Frensham Ponds, which is a beautiful location. They've done quite a few feature films there because it's sort of, there's a kind of sandy beach, and then you've got the lake itself. So it is a really beautiful spot. So some of those scenes would have been really nice.
do you not have the top stat that Julius Smith was going to direct this, and Hugh Davis said, "I'm not directing the Underwater Menace," so they swapped them over?
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, can't think why. So yeah, I'm slightly. It's interesting because this and The Smugglers, in some ways, should be kind of on a par. This should be quite a romp, but then equally, the history of it is quite brutal. I mean, it was a slaughter. It wasn't. It's not a nice historical event to go back to. And I suppose on that notion, you then have storylines about slavery, and that's what this is. The idea is that they're going to try and sell them out as slaves. I mean, it's an awful historical happening. And there's nothing wrong with covering topics like that. There's nothing wrong with it at all. You've just got to tell it in a way that still keeps it as an adventure that's engaging, I think. And I think the sort of problem with this is that it doesn't feel like you're invested in it.
It doesn't. Absolutely, it doesn't. And this goes right back for me. I think there's little to compare against The Smugglers. Actually, I think The Smugglers is a much better story. It's it's difficult to put my finger on what that is. I just wonder whether there's just a different style because it's still a Hartnell story. But I go all the way back to the Reign of Terror, and we've already reviewed this in one of our other videos. And absolutely, that is the most unwatchable historical because it's just got no hope in it whatsoever. And I think this is the problem with the Highlanders. I think it's just a bit too dour. There's a few little bits to lift it here and there, but there isn't a huge amount of anything. I always think historicals work well when they've got some comedy or some lightness in there. There's got to be light and shade. And there absolutely is no light in this story whatsoever.
I mean, The Smugglers is pretty violent, but it's an interesting story. It keeps you going with the intrigue and the treasure and everything. But this is just, it plods. It really does. And you just want there to be some different angle or some different part of the story that's going to make you go, oh, yeah, that,
There's the mystery of Kirsty's ring. There is. That's an actual part of the story.
I know. It's as I said, there's very little to lift this story.
I think sort of. You go back to the previous year. I mean, the massacre obviously isn't a laugh a minute. It's not a laugh a minute setup, but it works. It's engaging. It's got. I mean, we'll talk about that anon. Mythmakers again. It's not a cheery historical subject, but that's got the comedy. It's got an element to it. Highlanders, I'm not even upset by it being a real take on the events. I'm not. It just doesn't feel to me that you're carried along with it, which is a shame. And it's a shame if that's watching that made it. Do you know what? I'm so stupid talking about the Time Warrior being the first Doctor Who story we have historical and. Even the Daleks at the end of the season sort of set in the Victorian times, isn't it? And has a bit of Dalek in it, doesn't it?
Albeit briefly.
We'll cut the other bit out where I start talking about the Time Warrior.
No, we won't. We'll leave that in there.
Anyway, see where my mind. It's very late here. So I'm not sure I have an awful lot, and I feel bad because I feel like I'm slightly short selling it. And I've sat through the whole thing, telesnaps and audios and everything for this.
I have also engaged with the audio on this one, and my opinion hasn't changed.
I think if I could see it, I'd probably like it more. And I don't hate it by any means. It's not something that I'm repulsed by. I think there's some good elements to it. And I think there's some nice elements, as I mentioned before. But I wouldn't rush to the shelf in, I don't know, Nigeria and say, I can only pick up 4 tins. I'm going to take the Highlanders. I don't think it would be. I don't think it'd be the one I'd send off with the station manager.
They probably would have taped over it with Scott and Charlene's wedding from Neighbours in the 80s. So, I mean...
I think there might be some hidden gems in here. We just don't know it, I think, again, because we don't have the visuals. Because we know how again, much of a visual actor that Pat is. So there may be some bits in here that we just can't pick up on audio.
Ben being ducked. Walks the plank. And Ben walks the plank.
Yes, no, I know the bit. Yeah, there are some bits I think visually that would have worked. I just think we're lacking visual, and that's probably not going to help my score. I think in this instance. Right.
I think we're going to have to hit scores on the doors here because we are treading water more than the Highlanders itself. Go on, who's going first?
I will go first. I just really struggled to engage with this, and like you say, if we had the actual visual, it may be different, but as a story, it's a very ploddy 4.
Ploddy 4. What's Jason going to give it?
Okay. I'm trying to think of a summary. Okay. It's really not the best historical out there. I think we miss it. I think it'd be nice if we had it back. We'd have some visuals, as I've said. A couple of nice guest bits in here. But I can't find anything to redeem this. So unfortunately for me, it's a 3.
Oh, she's brutal. She's brutal. Because I'm the voice of reason and kindness in these things. Lovely Target book cover. I'll say that. Nice bit of art on the Target. I'm giving the Highlanders a 5. I'm giving it the benefit of the doubt. I don't think it's awful. I don't think it's amazing. I'm happy to put it somewhere in the middle, and I'd like to hope that if I could see it, I'd love it more and things would change. But I genuinely, it's a little bit like, I suppose, if you've only, and I did love Enemy of the World, but a lot of people only had episode 3 as a barometer and they were like, it's dreary. I think if you had the visuals, it would lift it from just being an episode 3 of Enemy of the World, if that makes sense. But that leaves the Highlanders on a very sad 12.
Yeah. If it's of any interest, I scored the Reign of Terror lower than that, so it's not the worst historical by any stretch.
There's more to unleash ships soon.
Well, we're going to go on to brighter and better things, and we're on to the next story, which is Underwater Menace. Who's starting us on the fish people? Oh, James, you've got something fishy going on there, so you start.
Yeah, I should start. You see, I was going to cosplay as this, but no. So we're in Atlantis, and we find ourselves with Professor Zaroff, who's got a crazy plan to essentially drain the oceans by drilling into the earth to drain the oceans. I love when I first was watching this. It's like it's proper Bond villain sort of. I'm going to control the oceans by draining them away. It's just unfortunate that that's where the parallel ends, because although the story itself has got a little bit of excitement to it, I was quite thrilled by that. It starts to go downhill from then onwards for me. It's I don't know. I don't know whether it's the fish people or what it is, but the story never quite lives up to the sort of expectation for me of this is something that's happening, and I kind of drifted off halfway through, if I'm honest. I had to go back and watch, I think it was episode 2 or 3 again, because I was kind of like, what did I miss? Because I really did tail off.
I think people have a very low opinion of this, and actually it's just a little bit of fun here. I think, especially as a reward after the Highlanders, is it just actually quite a bright it's not good. I'd be surprised if someone says to me, my favourite Doctor Who story of all time is Underwater Menace. I would not imagine it's anyone's favourite, and it's probably a lot of people's least favourite, probably just by reputation. But actually, it's just fun. I don't think it's awful. I don't think it's great. it depends what sort of frame you're coming to it at. And when we watched it the other day, Joseph First is the name you have to talk about, isn't he? Azaroth. But it's sort of alluded in the last one. I think you either go big or go home. If your character is a maniacal professor that's trying to drain all the oceans in the world, do you underplay it, or do you go, actually, do you know what? I'm the villain of the fish people. I've got to play this to the back of the theatre. This has got to go big. And I think as much as people love, especially the cliffhanger, nothing in the world can stop me. People love taking that out and being like, oh my God, this is overacting, this is horrendous. How else? How else do you get to the cliffhanger page and the last line is nothing in the world can stop me now? You go, well, nothing in the world. You own it. You go big. And I think you can hate the performance, but I think it's great. I think he gives it a bit of colour and a bit of lift.
And I don't hate the performance. I think he hits the high note. I love that one little scene where he absolutely chews not only the scenery, he's chewing the entire bloody studio. He is loving that moment. He's got the camera on him and he loves it. Actually, this has got the piece around it that says this is probably one of the most hated Doctor Who stories out there. So actually, because it used to be the gunfighters and now it seems to be this story. And I think when we only had episode 3, this is coming back to the enemy of the world thing here. When we only had episode 3, I maybe had some mixed opinions on this story. Now, whilst I'm not going to go out there and say this is a classic by any stretch of the imagination, episode 2 adds something to the other existing episode. And the episode I really actually wish we did have in this one is episode 4, because that's his undoing. And again, I think that's probably going to be played to the rafters as well and done really, really well. I don't think it's as bad a story as people say it is. Yes, okay. It's not got an awful lot of substance. The fish people, they're great visually. They bob around and do their thing. That's pretty much all they do. But you have got a pretty good solid cast in here. And you've got Julia Smith at the helm on this one, directing it. She's trying her best with what isn't the best script in the world, but it's by no means, in my opinion, the worst Doctor Who script.
I mean, I'm not saying that I hate it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not of that opinion for this story. It was originally dropped. It was then rewritten. It was put back in. There were things that cast members did not like about it. I mean, when Jamie slaps Polly, for example, there were scenes that people did not, cast and crew were not happy about. The idea that Polly's going to be turned into one of the fish people as well. I just find it, for me, this is like the equivalent of something like Love and Monsters, which is, well, I'm going to say
Good
it.
gracious me.
It's one of those ones where...
I'm going to hate on Love and Monsters. It's a separate discussion.
But, where some people really dislike it, some people really just is it not massive.
Is it time, James? Is it time to wave my extra old Marmite, because we're in the 60s here?
You are exactly.
You literally walked into that trap. You literally walked into it. The Marmite trap.
I'm being paid to cue him to wave his Marmite.
And it's my specially extra old Marmite as well for the old episodes.
It wasn't extra old until he touched it.
I'm not that old.
Aren't you?
Okay.
Jason was the first Doctor Who story to be wiped. He's that old.
Christ, you'd be calling me a pre-Hartnell doctor next.
You are a pre-Hartnell, aren't you?
Anyway, back to the Underwater Menace.
But at least it's got James off the hook there, it has to be said. Because
I
do feel like there was just a little bit of backtracking coming on with James.
I thought he might fall over with all the backpedaling there.
I could show you the score that I put down here, and I assure you, it was... I started with the negative and didn't get much better.
the concept, I mean, the fish people, they're still, I mean, I love that kind of 60s design. I love that sort of look. I mean, they are all cut out of felt, and it's all very cheap and cheerful. But the notion of it is actually quite scary. I mean, that they are people that are grafted into being fish people. They aren't a race. They're a made thing. And that's quite ghoulish in that they try to turn Polly into a fish. But, and, you know, I mean, crikey, could you imagine trying to do not a kids show, but a family show where you have someone strapped to a table and you start injecting them and trying to operate on them to give them gills? I mean, there'll be questions asked. But, I mean, on the subject of Polly, again, back in this one, having been quite assertive in the Highlanders and a bit, let's go get them. This one, she's back to the screaming and the dragging and the being pulled around by different bad guys and pushed back, and it's a bit wet again, and it's like it's a real shame that you know, you get that drop, if you like, I suppose, in this story.
It almost feels like different writers just don't quite know where to go with the character of Polly, because she does seem to ebb and flow with the different writers. I mean, it's fair to say that Jeffrey Orm's script here isn't a work of art by any stretch, but he clearly, I don't think, understood that character, because I think, as you said, the last few stories definitely been a little bit more upbeat for her. So I think it's writer's interpretation partly here as well, is my opinion.
I've got another cast shout out for Peter Stevens, who turns it's his second, because he's also Cyril in Slut of Toymaker. He's a camp old queen. He's loving his little part in this, isn't he? I love how sneery he is.
Oh, he is definitely.
That's one of, you can have Zaroff as the sort of, you know, one of the ugly sisters, and I think he's the other ugly sister, and they're both giving it some, and that's great. Colin Jevens as well, I think, is really good in this. I think he always is. He always gives a very good turn in whatever he's in. Even with the eyebrows, those strange eyebrows going on in this. It is an odd thing. I mean, again, is it something where if you had your tins on the shelf in that dusty vault, and they said you can carry out the last 2 episodes of the Underwater Menace, would it be something you'd reach for? I'm not sure many people would.
I take any missing episode, I think. But
oh, Clifford, I didn't mean any. I meant if you could only pick up a couple. Obviously,
episode 4 of this one is the one I would reach for rather than episode 1.
Yeah, but then you're leaving behind the 2 episodes of Fury that are next to it, or 2 episodes of Smugglers and Mythmakers.
It's a dangerous game. It's a dangerous game to play missing episodes Monopoly in that way.
It is. I've only ever done it before in a shed in Wigan, and it wasn't fun.
Oh, I bet you threw a few out that day.
Burnt them to keep warm. So, have we got any statos on the Underwater? It's the same location as Destiny of the Daleks, isn't it, I believe?
Yep. Apart from this, there's a inner monologue scene at the very beginning, which you don't see very often with Doctor Who, where you're hearing the inner thoughts of the cast. But apart from that, no.
What? How many weeks have I got left in this?
Yeah.
Is he getting paid more than me?
You sure
Who offered him a regular?
You sure that wasn't the talk back that was being heard just that we were hearing the talk back there by default?
It was the green room while they were filming it, playing in the film insert. It's like, who asked him to stop on? Anyway, are we flopping towards into the sea for an Underwater Menace score?
Yeah.
Let's go to the Fishy Jason first.
Okay, then. So, like I said, this is a little bit of fun, and I think you've got to take it as such. And by no means, it's not the best piece of Doctor Who, but by no means is it the worst piece of Doctor Who either. Zaroff is terribly, terribly, terribly OTT, and I absolutely adore it. I think Pat's really hitting his stride in here. So I'm going to give this story a sensible 5.
Sensible 5. That's in a series that also includes a solid 7.
So I know that I'm accused of backtracking.
Oh.
However, you can see here my score is...
Card is ghostly.
Wow.
I know. Like the plot, it sort of phases in and out, but I also gave it a 5.
Okay, well, as is ever the case, I'm just going to briefly interject because it's someone who I have to mention who became an icon. There's a documentary called I Was a Doctor Who Monster. May not have seen it. Mary Macmillan is one of the fish people, and she's a proper old anecdote. She sadly passed away last year. My sense of time is terrible, but quite recently. And Mary Miller, it was someone who, as a result of that documentary, became a bit of an icon in our lives. And we always wanted to have her at an event, and she did a few with us. The first time she turned up to one, she had like this sort of netted top on, and she said, "Oh, I thought I'd wear something fishy." So she owned that fish people thing. So yeah, lovely Mary Macmillan. But Mary Mac alone cannot raise the scores too high. I've given it a 6. Which
I think we've all been very
nothing
fair
too
there.
fishy about that.
No, we've been very fair, I think.
we run out of fish puns. It gives us 16 overall, which isn't going to be enough to make it our season winner, surprisingly. But we're now going to take a trip to the moon, the Doctor Who and the Moonbase. Or Doctor Who and the Cybermen, if you bought one of the 800 prints of the book. Very hard to come by as a novel. Very hard to come by.
But a beautiful cover on the original version. No question of that one. Okay, 2070, and we're on the moon at the International Weather Control Base. This is probably my own opinion, and I'm happy to be shot down here. But it feels a little bit like the Moonbase is a remake of the 10th Planet, because it is absolutely put base under siege one more time. Except this time, we aren't at the South Pole, we're on the moon. And this is a gem of a story. I love this story. Again, if I were going back and I could pick them off the shelf, I would definitely have the two missing out of this one, because I think this is probably base under siege really now hitting a stride here. It's well written. I think the Cybermen are well used in this. See, they've taken the decision to change the design, and actually this isn't the worst design of the Cybermen by any stretch. But this is so much more claustrophobic than the 10th Planet. It feels really like they're in a position where any minute now, the Cybermen can launch a rocket at them and blow a hole in the side of the base and suck them all out the window. It's just a pure piece of proper Troughton Doctor Who, and I really quite like this story.
It's like they said, could you, submitted the first story and then went, could you just go back and revise it and just to make it just a tiny bit better? And the elements in this, I love, at the beginning they're sort of floating around in space, having a bit of a laugh, and then sort of Jamie gets knocked out, and then he keeps imagining this, he calls the Cyberman the Phantom Piper. We get similar to the first story where, they've got the hoods on, the Cybermen in the medical bay. It's like, wonder what that could be. That's like 7 foot tall with a massive sort of square part to it. It's there's some great elements there. You've got around, they're poisoning the sugar and they're getting the infection. So I do agree. It is similar. I will concede that. But it's not. There's enough about it to be enjoyable, all the same. It's not like it's a carbon copy. And we've talked about this with Dalek stories as well. From the sort of early years, how some of the ideas were just recycled. There is a bit of recycling here, yes, but I still enjoy it.
I mean, I suppose the biggest logistical flaw, and I don't want to be unkind in pointing it out, is that the Cybermen's aim is to get control of the gravitron.
Hmm.
Having already gained access to the base to just come in and out as they please and to just poison a bit of sugar and why don't they just go in and take control straight away? Seems a bit, they fanny about doing all that and then they're locked out of the base and they're like, well, we're going to get back in and take our gravitron back. It's kind of like, why didn't you just do it to start with? What was the delay for? So if you ignore that part of the logic, I mean, who needs logic in a Doctor Who story? It's nice, and I think that I'm going to say I really like the Moonbase. The funny thing is, my first encounter with it was the Cyberman the Early Years video.
Yeah.
And the weird thing again with that is that you've got episodes 2 and 4, and actually if you watch 2, there's enough recap of what happened in part 1 that you're all right with part 2. And when it comes to part 4, there's enough. Well, last week the Cybermen did this, and thankfully they won't be doing that again. And you don't so you kind of work it as the 2 and 4 is all right because they've explained the interim gaps. But there's lots of nice things to say about it. I like the new Cyberman design. I like the moon look. I like it's a good attempt, as they also do with the other 2 Cybermen stories following. It's a good attempt to make it an international moon base of the future. Not a moon base that employs ladies, but it's a moon base that employs different nationalities. So it's one step forward. The joyous thing, actually, I thought funnily watching was Ringberg's voice is so incredibly BBC received pronunciation. It's incredible. That I just heard your conversation. Under no circumstances are you. It's like you never get that name, never get that in anything. But there's something sort of beautiful about the fact that that's what the way they did that. No, again, I love the new Cyberman design. I love the voices effects, and I think it's a step up. And I think the episode that's missing, well, the 2 episodes, I think the skulking about in the shadows and the bit in there's a photo, isn't there, of him doing the thing with the gloves, the guy in the storage bay. I think all that sort of stuff of them skulking in the shadows is when they work really well. It's a little bit like later on in the invasion when they're in the sewers. I think there's something good about them being in shadowy locations, for want of a better description.
Yeah, I agree. And I think Maurice Barry, who directed this one, a director of note, and I think he did a fantastic job on Tomb of the Cybermen. I think he delivers here in spades. As again, he seems to, I don't know, he just seems to understand how to do a Cyberman story. Actually, I'd really like episode 1 back, because I think the beauty of Maurice's direction work is, I think his film work is particularly of note. And I think the stuff on the moon surface, while the crew are all having a bit of fun, the TARDIS crews that have just landed and they're having a bit of fun playing around, and Jamie gets injured, then they get them inside the moon base. Actually, I think visually that would look, I think that would have looked really good in live. Obviously, I've seen the photos with the strings and things, and obviously we wouldn't have seen the strings and all that sort of palaver on the TV because of the resolution of it. So I think that's the episode I probably wish I had the most here. But you're right, the Cybermen in shadows, skulking around, doing their thing, absolutely perfect. And I would imagine that Maurice would have made a great effort of that in the episodes that we didn't see. But also of note, the cyber army marching across the moon surface is an epic visual. And I'm really glad that we have that.
With Space Adventure, the theme tune, I love the Cyberman theme tune. I love how they've got a theme tune. I mean, that's great in itself, isn't it, really?
Before they're all floating off into space.
Including John Levine. He's a floater in this.
In his first appearance in Doctor Who, I understand.
Yeah.
But by no means his last.
No, not at all. Is that one of your stats, Stato? That's the important thing I'm interested in here.
I do have a couple, though. One of the scientists who's unnamed is Victor Pemberton, who would later go on to script edit Evil of the Daleks a bit later on.
And Debbie Chazen's dad's one of them as well.
Oh, really?
He gets poisoned by the sugar. When he goes, that's Debbie Chazen's dad.
The Cybermen recognise the Doctor despite the fact that he has regenerated since their last meeting.
I probably heard Jacob Dudman doing a impersonation on an audio.
We recognise your voice.
They might be subscribers. They get more.
And it's the last appearance of the original title sequence until Day of the Doctor. The sort of tear in the screen bit. So yeah, those were my stats for this one. Oh, and obviously at the end we have a mysterious claw.
Spoilers.
That's for another video. That's for another video. I'm glad that they brought the Cybermen back so quickly. I think it was great that we had another opportunity to see them quite so soon. And if you think about it, it really was quite quick in many respects. And clearly they were taking advantage of the fact that I think they'd clearly been popular. The design, as I said, doesn't offend me. I think it's kind of right that they maybe took that as a design decision. What would you think was behind that? Is it literally just down to the fact that potentially people didn't like those costumes in the first place?
I think Sandra's put it down to having more time and more money to do it. I think that's pretty much it. I mean, my personal, I think they look. It's more slick. It's more believable that they will be out there taking over the universe, I suppose. It's interesting. I suppose the difficulty is that they're already, and Doctor Who wasn't quite so continuity obsessed at this juncture. There's already a sort of notion of trying to put the Cybermen stories into an ordering and where they all fall. Because later in Tomb they recognise him, and there's the inference that they recognise him from the Moonbase. But then obviously Invasion must be set before that, and if the invasion set in the 70s, then they'd already invaded before 10th. But it all goes a bit crazy. But no, they're a bit more a bit baggier than the Tomb of Cybermen ones, aren't they? I think the Tomb ones might be a bit more slick than this, but it's definitely going in the right direction. I mean, the other thing we mentioned, Jamie getting knocked out in the moon crater. It is very obvious that they have not banked on having that many supporting team companions. There's a notion of let's knock him out and spread the lines round, and there are lots of awkward moments. I think when you get Jamie and Ben stood next to each other, both doing Ben's lines because there's only one part for them to do.
That was quite obvious in Underwater Menace as well, I think, unfortunately.
And also, not that I'm fixated on this situation, but Polly's back to screaming and making coffee for everyone. It's I mean, the good thing, I mean, I will say, is that she's the one that comes up with the cocktail Polly, doesn't she? She comes up with
the solvent.
Solvent, and it's the nail polish remover, and that's great. But there are sort of moments just like, go make everyone a nice cup of coffee, and like it's slightly awkward, but it's inevitable because it's 1967, and is it going to be something where it's a ball breaker? Yes, if it's the Avengers. But anyway, a power on that front.
For sure, I think certainly as well. So far in this season, this for me has probably been Pat's best story. So we're a couple in now to his tenure as the Doctor. And clearly, he hits his stride quite quickly, I think, in Power of the Daleks. We don't have visuals in some of the other ones, but again, you see these glimpses. At this stage, I think they've realized where his character is. And I think he's got it as well. And I think he understands how he's playing the part. And they're not relying on him dressing up in this one. They're relying on him just being who he is, the Doctor, a little bit odd, but he's the genius, and he's underplaying it all the time against everything else that's going on around him. He's almost like an extra in the room at times, but he's doing it so well, in my opinion, by this stage.
You get his defining, there are some corners of the universe which you've read. That speech is sort of quite definitive, I think, for his Doctor. I mean, on the subject, there are some lovely little comic touches on there where he's trying to get the samples and he steals the boot and all that sort of stuff. And they're quite, but because they're so subtle within it, they're nice little light tones, which then when you have something like the cliffhanger where he's like, did they look in here? And you know, it's all in his face. It's all in that beautiful big close-up. Did they look in here? It's like, that's when they realise that, you know, Cybermen they're on quite a shaky table next to them.
But it comes to reinforce what we've said a few times now. His portrayal is it's very visual. So again, if we didn't have that particular episode of the Moonbase to watch, we wouldn't be picking those nuances up. So we've got to question, you know, are we missing some real comedy little gems in some of those things, in some of those episodes that we don't have with him in?
I think it's an inevitable thing. I mean, the biggest thing that strikes me about that is Enemy of the World Part 1, where he runs out into the sea and does his little jig and all that stuff, which on audio, it's just, you know, the Doctor jumps out of the TARDIS and whatever. But to see it, that's just, it's a world apart. And that's the gutting thing. I mean, it is quite sad in some ways doing this season, because there's so much that I think it's easy to go, I don't think this is very interesting, or I think this is a bit slow, or whatever. That would be completely different if we could actually watch it as we're meant to be watching it.
Yeah. I agree.
And the novelization is a gem on this one as well. Just brings a little bit of added dimension in, I think, as well.
I mean, I think the novel might be one of the ones which everyone who's had a Target book in their life must have had a Cyberman. Whether it got the Invasion Cyberman drawn on the front or not. But no, I think it's assured. I think it's one of those where it's a very assured piece. It doesn't outstay its welcome, and I think each individual episode has got its own jeopardy and its own point to, you know. I even like the resolution. I think it's quite fun that they just bounce them all off into space. It's great.
And it's setting the template for the next season as well. You're definitely getting here. They're working out through the season what's going to work, and clearly season 5 is going to benefit largely from some of the learnings that came out of season 4, and this is one of them.
So the question is, are we heading towards a score on the door? See, now the fact that I forgot to look at, am I right in thinking that the gravitron almost fell on Patrick Troughton, or it did hit him? That's another thing for people to look at home. I'm very sure about the story.
Is that a myth, or is that an actual stat, I wonder?
Stato has failed us in finding these gems this week. Failed us, he has. But do you know,
I had it on my sheet, but I didn't want to mention it because I don't like to take the limelight away from him in any way.
Oh, yes, you do.
He said, so Doctor Who and the Moonbase, who's going to score us first?
Go on, then I will score first. So, it is very similar to the last one, but I would say there's enough about it that makes me enjoy this story. And so I gave it an equaling 8 out of 10.
You don't feel hate, it's an 8. What's Jason going to give Doctor Who and the Moonbase?
Nothing wrong with a good 8. Okay, I like this story. I think this is a great traditional base under siege Patrick Troughton Doctor Who story. It's got some great villains. It's got great direction, great cast in it. And for me, I am finding that I'm going to agree with James on my score here. I actually believe that we've got a very solid 8 in the Moonbase.
Well, like a generation of Cybermen being replicated. I kind of feel in a lot of ways this is a bit like a Planet of the Daleks. It's not high art. I don't think this is some great piece of amazing high art or what. But I just think it's one that I really like watching. I really enjoy watching. I'd love to see the rest of it properly, but I enjoy listening to it. I love watching it. So I have also giving the Moonbase an 8.
Ooh. Look at us in total agreement for
really doesn't
Triple
happen.
8, not triple A.
That just doesn't happen very often, does it?
Which gives Doctor Who and the Moonbase 24 points.
very good.
Which means, like a thrilling cliffhanger, at the end of part 2, the Moonbase has edged it into the lead. So Moonbase is our current winner at the moment on 24 points, followed by Power of the Daleks on 23, 10th Planet on 21.5, Smugglers on 20.5, Underwater Menace on 16, and the Highlanders is propping up the field on 12. But there are 3 more stories to go. Oh yes, 3 more stories. Lots of coffee all around. Hope you're still with us, and we'll see you next time. So